Price wrote to us, she had never met a family like this. They did not have TV. They did not use cell phones. They did not have technology in ways like children are glued. Instead, their home was filled with books, musical instruments, artistic equipment like paint and crayons and markers, and huge construction paper for art projects. Their yard was open, and a large part of it was a garden. Price says all of the signs in the protest scenes the family had already made for past rallies. On the left is Sierra Hart holding a free hug sign. Next to her is Devonte with the same message around his neck. Jenny Price wrote, "This family exemplified the hope, acceptance, genuine will of unconditional love for all beings. I am a better human for knowing them. I am honored to have got to spend the time that I did with them."
Hi, my name is Madison, and you are listening to or watching Who's Knocking, a true crime podcast. Almost forgot there. Welcome. If you're new here, hi. If you're not, welcome back. I very much appreciate having you here on my channel. I'm very happy to see you. Today, we are doing a new episode, and I think it's going to be a two-parter. It is going to be a two-parter. I know it's going to be a two-parter. I was going to do something shorter coming off of 4 parts of Iceman, but this one just really got away from me. There's a lot here. And this case is very upsetting. There is child abuse involved, so just so as you know. If you would subscribe to me, that would be really awesome. I would super appreciate that. I also have a newsletter that comes out every Friday. It is called Grim Weekly. You can find it at grimweekly.com. You can see old issues on that website, and you can sign up there for free. It's fun. I think I'm going to get right into it because there's a lot to cover in this case. So today we're talking about the Hart family. This is the Hart family. Now, this family is made up of 2 lesbian moms, Jen and Sarah Hart, and their 6 adopted children. There's Markis, Hannah, Abigail, Devonte, Jeremiah, and Sierra. Now, there's a lot of photos on the internet of what appeared to be a very loving, happy, and supportive family made up of 8 people who are all patched together like a nice big quilt. These 6 children who surely would have been criminals, drug dealers, drug addicts, or worse had it not been for these 2 beautiful, selfless women who, after battling their own adversity, took in 6 kids from foster care and gave them the life of their dreams. Right? No, not at all. So I first learned about this case. I actually didn't realize that I was learning about the case because it was featured in season 3, episode 1 of Atlanta. If you haven't watched Atlanta, it's a very good show. It's Donald Glover's show that he writes and acts in. And he did an episode about this family with an alternative ending. The ending in his show is a lot better than this one. And it was really interesting because his episode, it was a take on this case. And it was also a take on Lake Lanier. I don't know if you've heard of Lake Lanier, but there's been people have done episodes on it, but it's like a kind of paranormally situation based in some sort of like really tragic historical story that I think intersects very well with this story. And he did a really good job on that episode. Highly suggest watching that. But as I was watching that, I was like, damn, Donald, like this is some crazy shit that you're coming up with in your own mind. But little did I know it was an actual story. And so later, it wasn't until very recently that I saw somebody post something about this family. And I was like, that sounds very familiar. And I looked it up, and it was what he based that episode on. So I'm going to get into it. This is going to go a little bit all over chronologically. In my newsletter recently, I was asking people how they prefer to hear true crime stories. Like, do you prefer it to go in a completely chronological order, or do you like to hear about the incident and kind of work your way backwards? I played around a little bit with the narrative and structure in this episode, so let me know what you think if you have any thoughts. So I'm going to start with the women in this case, the moms. It's very difficult to find much information on Sarah and Jennifer's upbringings, especially Sarah. There's a little bit more on Jennifer, but it's very minimal. Both Sarah and Jennifer, we know, were born in 1979, so they were the same age. They were both the oldest children in their families. I think Sarah had 3 siblings and Jennifer had 2 siblings. Now, Jennifer's parents divorced when she was 12 years old, and she was living with her mom, and she was seeing her father on the weekends. I don't know if it was every weekend or every other weekend, but she had weekend time with her dad. When she was 14 years old, for whatever reason, she ended up moving into her father's home. But that didn't last very long because apparently Jennifer started getting into trouble, according to her father, and so he sent her back to live with her mother. Jennifer Hart met Sarah Gangler when they were both students at Northwestern University. Jen was from Huron, South Dakota, and Sarah was from Big Stone City in South Dakota. So they were both South Dakota gals. Both women were majoring in elementary education. And in 2002, Sarah graduated from this program. Jen did not, but she quit school at the time to be with Sarah. Apparently, through their entire relationship up until that point, they knew that they were lesbians and they were a couple together, but they hid that from everyone around them and they remained closeted. And when they finally graduated and just left school, in Jennifer's case, they did come out as lesbians and told people around them. And they said that not everybody in their lives was accepting of this. I don't know that that's true, but that's what they claimed. And so the couple decided that they would relocate to Alexandria, Minnesota. And that's a place that neither of them had lived before. It was a fresh start for them, and they were going to start their lives. They didn't get married at that time, but Sarah did change her last name to Hart. And at that time, Jennifer cut off her entire family. She just decided she was going to start a new life and was going to totally start over. And the pair essentially isolated themselves from everybody that they had once known and were just, as I said, making a fresh start. Now, within their relationship, it's become very clear that Sarah was a much more passive and reserved one of the two. She was very responsible and, she kind of was the one to just put her head down and get shit done. Whereas Jennifer was definitely the boss. She had a very big personality. She seemed to be the one making all the decisions. She was described as super fun and outgoing. She had lots of friends. She seemed to make friends pretty easily. But if anybody ever crossed Sarah or questioned her, she was very quick to attack and then cut that person off. So she was the type of person to constantly be making new friends, but also constantly be cutting people as soon as a minor disagreement would arise. Jen appeared to have some pretty major control issues, and she did not take criticism well or at all, quite frankly. And Sarah, being kind of the peacemaker that she was, just kind of went along with Jen's every whim. And I think that Jen, probably really liked that in Sarah because she was somebody that she could very easily boss around. In 2004, the Harts began fostering a 15-year-old girl. Now, this girl, she's alive and well. She had a big interview with the Seattle Times in regards to this case, and she does not want to be named, so she has decided to go by the name Lee for these purposes, which is not her name, but it's what I will refer to her as. Lee had a history of behavioral issues. Her mom was a single mom who, her claim is that she couldn't handle her, so she gave her up to the foster care system. And it appeared that this was all out in the open. This was not stuff that was hidden from the Hart women when they took her in. And just to be clear, I don't mean to at all make this seem like this was Lee's fault. I don't know exactly what the story here is with her life, but I think it's safe to say that her issues came from the way she was or was not raised. And she's a child in foster care who needed help, love, and support, period. Things went well for a while. With Sarah, Jen, and Lee. They did a lot of cool activities, lots of outdoor stuff like camping and hiking. It's obvious from the many photos of the Harts that they were super outdoorsy people. They seemed very adventurous. This was all very new for Lee. She did not have a life beforehand where like adults were taking her out to do cool activities. So this was like all new and exciting for her, and she said that she really enjoyed it. Now, according to Lee, the Harts were very explicit in saying that they were going to keep her until she was 18 years old, because I guess at 18, like you no longer need to be in the foster care system, but they, told her like, we like you, we will care for you until you're 18 years old. And that arrangement was agreed upon by all parties, and everyone was very happy about it. Lee went on to claim that she did start to notice a very weird dynamic between the couple. Jen was clearly the very dominant one, she says, and she was also very weirdly emotional and immature, which kind of goes along with the personality that I was describing earlier. Lee described a story in the Seattle Times article where the three of them went to a Lambeau Field for a Green Bay Packers game. I believe this is football. I don't know anything about sports, nor do I care. Sorry. But anyway, they went to this football game, and apparently Jen was a really big fan of one of the players, this guy named Ahmed Green. He was a running back. Whatever the fuck that is. And after the game, the family approached the players hoping to get some football signed. Obviously, Jen leading the group in this. She really wanted her football signed. I assume it was very crowded, and Ahmed could only sign a few of the footballs, and Lee's ball was chosen to be signed and not Jen's. And I will quote Lee from the article, quote, "It turned into a huge fiasco. Jen thought I had done it to be a brat. She ignored me for days," end quote. So that's a very petty, and I find that behavior extremely strange in an adult towards a child. Fine, Lee's a teenager, but like this is a child that you're supposed to be the guardian of, and you're gonna give her the silent treatment for 4 days because she got her ball signed and you didn't. Like, that's insane. The Harts also had plans at the time to adopt a trio of siblings from Texas. So plans were underway for that. And Sarah and Jen were very open about this process as well with Lee. They talked to her about the prospect of being a big sister. They showed her photos of the kids. They got her all pumped up about it and were like, you have to be a good example for these kids. And Lee was, like, cool, that sounds good. However, 1 week before the new kids arrived, or were due to arrive for their trial period, which there's generally a trial period when you adopt kids. I don't know if that's in every single adoption North American wide, but in this case, there was a trial period. So a week before the kids were due to arrive, Jen and Sarah dropped Lee off to a therapy session, and they never came back for her. The Harts set up this whole give backseat situation without a word. The therapist had to be the one to tell Lee that she was going to be placed with a new family, and all of her things had been taken to the new family without her knowledge, completely behind her back. And the reasons that the Harts gave to CPS for returning Lee, who they'd promised to keep, was that she had mental issues and was apparently suicidal, and they noted behavioral issues. They claimed that she was like eating out of the garbage, which she says she never did. And they didn't want that negative energy around their new children. Now, first of all, this story has been repeated many times. I'm sure it's possible that we're not getting the full picture. Maybe, I don't know, but Lee has been interviewed and she corroborates the story and that their claims about her were not true. I think what we do know for sure is that they returned this foster girl without telling her, which to me just seems extremely cruel. extremely cruel. Like, you don't even have the balls to say it to her face. This teen girl is in foster care, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know about her story. I can only assume, though, that she had a very difficult life leading up to that point. And then to be taken in by these two women, to be told by them that they were going to care for her until she was 18 and love her, and then all of a sudden, never mind, we're getting new kids. Like, it's outrageous to me. Outrageous. The new foster family were apparently wonderful, thank goodness. And Lee says that they are still in her life, and she considers them grandparents to her children. So although it was devastating to her at the time and probably a very traumatic situation, she did really escape an ending that was pretty brutal, which of course we'll get to. She's actually the only person in this story who got a happy ending. After that whole fiasco, none of these adoption agencies, I don't know if they didn't know about this situation or they were like, they just return kids, but whatever, we'll give them 3 more. But in 2006, the couple legally adopted their first round of children. They adopted 8-year-old Markis, 4-year-old Hannah, and 2-year-old Abigail. And we will get into the nitty-gritty of the adoptions later, but for now, know that they adopted 3 children in 2006. Once that adoption came through, Sarah continued her work as a manager at a department store, and Jennifer, who also worked at that department store, quit her job and she decided to stay home with the children. Sarah and Jen appeared to be super happy to be moms, to have this adorable little family. Both moms went to school for education, so they seemed to be very confident parents who were thriving in motherhood. Like, it was something that they always wanted to do, and lots of photos, lots of showing off of their kids. They, by all accounts, appear to be fantastic. In 2008, the women adopted another 3 kids, siblings Devonte, age 5, Jeremiah, age 4, and Sierra, age 3. Jennifer was constantly posting photos of her family online. The photos were always gorgeous, the framing, the colors. She obviously was a pretty talented photographer. The Hart family appeared to be a very happy and cohesive family unit. They were always at these like festivals or protests or rallies, these like really hippie-looking outdoor festival type things. Apparently a lot of it was music festivals. The kids were always smiling. They were dancing. They were participating in whatever activity they were doing. And we will dive a lot further into the Facebook use in a little bit. Now, on March 26, 2018, tragedy struck. A German tourist called in a report of an overturned SUV that appeared to have gone over a cliff. The Hart family SUV, which was a GMC Yukon, was found upside down at the bottom of a 100-foot cliff drop alongside a remote stretch of highway in Mendocino, California. The vehicle had been in the water for multiple hours before it was discovered. At the vehicle crash site, police found the bodies of Sarah and Jennifer Hart and the bodies of 3 children, 2 younger ones and one that appeared to be in his late teens. Of the 6 Hart children, 3 were missing. Now, the bodies needed to be identified, and they got in contact with one of Jen's aunts, who seemed to be the family member who was closest with the family. They first identified Markis. He was the easiest to identify because he was the oldest teenager. He was 19 years old, and he also had a very discernible jawline. He was 19 at the time of his death. Markis was described as a very caring and empathetic young man. He was the oldest of the kids. He loved animals, and he was very passionate about social justice. He loved writing, and he often wrote about his experiences as an adopted child. I mean, he was no longer a child, he was an adult. The next to be identified was Jeremiah. At the time of the crash, Jeremiah was 14 years old. He was described as a very happy, very curious child. He liked building things. He was like Lego, and he was really into Lego. So I'm assuming that he was liked to build things. He also really enjoyed being outdoors. He was said to have a very contagious smile and a very joyful personality. Then, with the help of the aunt, they were able to identify the final body, and that was Abigail, who was 14 years old at the time of her death. Abigail was described as very quiet, and she was kind of more on the reserved side. She loved reading and writing. She was described as having a very vivid imagination. She liked to write stories about fairies and like fantasy type things. That's what we know about her. So Sarah, Jen, Markis, Jeremiah, and Abigail, those were the people who were identified, and the rest were still missing. Investigators decided to open active missing persons reports for the remaining children. They assumed, based on the condition of the car and the site, that the other children were probably washed into the water, and that's very likely where they would find them. But they did hope that for some reason or another, maybe the kids had stayed with friends or for whatever reason were not in the car. And so, this was a very public case. There was lots of police to the public. If anybody knows anything about this family, please let us know, et cetera, et cetera. In the coming weeks, Sierra's body was located in the water. Sierra was 12 at the time of her death, and she was described as a very playful child. She loved to play with her siblings, and she really enjoyed being the center of attention and, seemed to be a very, outgoing, dramatic. I don't mean dramatic in a bad way, but like to show off and stuff and be the center of attention kind of thing. A few days later, a shoe was found in the water that had a sock inside, and inside that sock, they found bone fragments. And through DNA testing, they determined that they had found parts of Hannah. Hannah was 16 at the time of her death. She was described as a very bright and bubbly young lady. She loved music and singing. She was known for being very outgoing and having a very easy time making friends. Now, last was Devonte, and Devonte's body to this day has never been recovered. It is assumed that he was in the car and was washed away by the ocean, and he is now legally considered deceased. Devonte was 15 at the time of his death. He was a very sensitive and caring boy, wore his emotions on his sleeve. He was very committed to social justice issues, and he was known for his love of hugs, which we will get to. Now, these were very minimal little descriptions of these children. And that is because it's extremely difficult to find information about the Hart children as individual people. And even what I could find, I am very skeptical of. I would not be surprised if these are very inaccurate descriptions of these children. And I really wish that I had more to say about them, but by the end of the story, I think it will be very clear as to why there is so little known about them and who they truly were as people. And that's one of the saddest things about this story, is that I think very few, if any, people actually knew them as their true, genuine selves, which we will get to, which I'm going to probably say a lot. So they have this horrific crash, and it claims the life of 8 people. Terrible tragedy. Of course, they needed to do some investigation to determine what exactly happened here, malfunction, or what the hell happened. And it wasn't too long into this investigation that they realized that maybe this crash wasn't an accident at all, but maybe it was a family annihilation/suicide. I'll talk a little bit about the crash and the investigation and how they came to discover this. So 2 days before the crash, Sarah had sent out a message to the people at her work. She was working at a Kohl's at the time. And she told them that she was sick and that she maybe needed to go to the hospital. And then nobody heard from her after this. And that was on a Friday. I believe that was Friday, March 24th. What was actually going on in the Hart home was that both CPS, Child Protective Services, and Washington's DSHS, which was the Department of Social and Health Services, had attempted to check on the Harts multiple times after receiving allegations of child abuse. On one occasion, just before the crash, a DSHS agent knocked on the door after seeing the Harts arrive home in their SUV and go in the house, but nobody answered the door. And so they just left, even though they had allegations that the children were being abused. Red flag 1. So by the end of that day, the Hart's SUV was gone from the driveway. And that was according to neighbors. On Monday, March 26th, after nobody had heard from Sarah and she didn't show up for work, her friend Cheryl Hart, no relation but same last name, called the police to ask that a welfare check be done on Sarah and her family. Everyone at work was very worried because they had had that text from Sarah on the Friday, or it was like early morning Saturday, like in the 1 to 3 a.m. range Saturday morning that they received the text. And so she said that she might be going to the hospital, and then no one heard from her. And so they were really worried. Sarah had been known to be an extremely dependable person at work. So they knew that she wouldn't just not show up and without saying anything. So they called in and requested a welfare check. And that welfare check wasn't done until March 27th, 2018, so the next day. So that's like, they're starting to look into this, and they're like, this is a bit sketchy. Because the crash happened on the highway, on the road or whatever, the investigation fell under the jurisdiction of the California Highway Patrol. And pretty immediately, they started figuring that things did not add up for this to be an accident. The police determined, or the Highway Patrol, I guess they were kind of working in conjunction at that point. They believed that the two women were on the run with their 6 kids. They had figured out all of the child service checks that were unresolved, the welfare check, and then they began to get into the allegations of child abuse and learned that the allegations were regarding them depriving their children of food. When the Hart home was searched by police, they found the home empty, of course, but they found that there was food that appeared to be out in the open and easily accessible to anybody who wanted it, like it appeared to be. The fridge and the freezer were packed full of food. There were a ton of meat products, lots of processed meat stuff in the freezer, which was a little strange because Jennifer talked online often about the entire family being vegetarian, and she kind of really put out that they were into kale and growing food and really natural stuff, but their fridge was full of frozen pizzas and hot dogs and stuff like that, which no judgment, it's just it's very opposed to what she was portraying herself to be, which will be a pattern. They discovered indications that these deaths were intentional. And that was very shocking for everybody. In Mendocino County, which is also very common in a lot of small counties, the coroner is also the county sheriff, which is an interesting kind of crossover mix of things to be. And he knew that it would be an extremely big deal on deciding the manner of death. So his 2 options were accidental or homicide for the children, suicide for the women. And if he went the wrong way in either direction, it would be a huge miscarriage of justice. So it was very important to do a thorough investigation and make sure that this was done properly and decided based on an abundance of evidence. So he ordered a coroner's inquest to determine the manner of death. The Highway Patrol investigation came up with the following. There was no indication of seatbelt use, even though friends said that Jennifer was very strict with seatbelts. And she was very strict with a lot of things that we'll find out. There were no skid marks on the road, meaning that the driver, which we know was Jennifer, did not try to brake before going over the cliff. They discovered through a forensic search of the vehicle that there was no braking as they veered toward the water, and the speedometer was at 90 miles per hour. These factors all added up to the theory that they had purposely driven off the cliff. If they had lost control, it's very likely that Jennifer would have tried to brake and you would see skid marks and there would be a technical indication of this in the vehicle.
On here, 0 seconds, I'm going to round these numbers, 1 mile per hour, 2 seconds at 17 miles per hour, and then 3 seconds as the vehicle is coming off this berm at 20 miles per hour. And then you have 4, 4.5, and 5 seconds as the vehicle is falling from the cliff edge.
Timothy Roloff and the California Highway Patrol determined the Hart SUV went from standing still to gas pedal floored as Jennifer Hart sat behind the wheel, legally drunk.
We have the vehicle going from 34% throttle to 100% throttle. and there's no subsequent application of the brake. And during that time, you're going from idling with what the brake has been on, and now you're on the throttle, and the throttle is going to 100%. You're accelerating to 20 miles per hour as you head towards that cliff face. Our analysis of that data was that this was consistent with this being an intentional act.
Additionally, a look at Sarah's internet search history was very telling. Some of her final searches were as follows. On March 23rd, she searched, "Can 500 milliliters of Benadryl kill a 120-pound woman? How easily can I overdose on over-the-counter medications? And what will happen when overdosing with Benadryl?" On March 24th, she searched, "Is death by drowning relatively painless? And how long does it take to die from hypothermia in water while drowning in a car?" Very specific. All of these searches were immediately deleted from the search history, but of course recovered by forensic analysts. The Harts also had a dog, and interestingly, one of her last searches was for no-kill animal shelters. The dog was recovered at their home, and he was fine. So on April 13th of 2018, the Toxicology Report came out. It was discovered that Jennifer Hart, who was the driver, had a blood alcohol reading of 0.102, which was well above the legal limit. They said it was something like 5 drinks. According to her family, that was very surprising because Jennifer was not a big drinker at all, if at all. Sarah Hart was not found with alcohol in her system, but she was found to have Benadryl in her system. The children also had very high levels of Benadryl or a Benadryl-like substance, which was diphenhydramine, a drug. It's a Benadryl-like drug. I think it's a drug that is in Benadryl, and this substance was found in 3 of the children, the only 3 I think that they were able to actually test for because the rest had been so damaged by the water. And this finding led investigators to believe that the moms had drugged the kids maybe an hour or 2 before the crash so that they would be asleep in the car at the time of their deaths. Now, the result of the coroner's inquest was that all of the children died by homicide and that Sarah and Jennifer died by suicide. Now, we call this type of mass murder a family annihilation, and it's quite a rare occurrence that a person takes their own life as well as the lives of their entire family. And it's also exceedingly rare that the perpetrator is a woman. Usually with family annihilators, it's a man. And usually we find that there's some sort of stressor that builds to the point that the person sees no way out and they see killing the rest of their family as an act of mercy. They feel that they may be sparing the family from the difficulties and challenges that would await them after the perpetrator would have killed themselves. Common stressors for family annihilators include the desire for status, and I guess they're not achieving that, financial strain, and domestic abuse. Mental illness often tends to be a factor with family annihilators. Most family annihilators suffer from depression and or anxiety. And in some cases, family annihilators suffer from psychotic breaks that lead them to believe that killing their family is the only way to protect them from some sort of perceived harm. For people who knew and loved the Harts, it was very difficult to reconcile the person, Jennifer, that they thought they knew and the reality of her actions. Like there's a lot of people who I think just didn't believe it at all.
We weren't duped. That love wasn't fake. They loved their children. They weren't white supremacists. They just were isolated. They were in pain. She was in constant anxiety.
Bakhtiar says Jennifer struggled after a photo of Devonte hugging a Portland police officer at a protest went viral.
After that picture happened with Devonte, Jen went into the deepest, darkest depression ever.
Jennifer texted that the backlash to the photo was traumatic, that people were stalking the house and leaving threats in their mailbox. She said that's why she had been, in her words, non-existent publicly, that she was working through some messed up stuff.
Now that I realize how serious it was, it's I just wish I had known to be well, let's get security cameras, or like, let's call somebody, or let's find remediation.
In another text sent last year, Jennifer told Bakhtiar that during the past 8 months, she had only texted 3 people, Bakhtiar, Sarah, and a stranger by accident. She said it had been the toughest year of her life. Still, Bakhtiar has a hard time believing the crash was intentional.
We love them, they loved their children, they were spiritual, they were about nature, they loved animals, they were rescuers. I don't feel like I didn't know them.
Now, after taking a much deeper look into the family history, with a specific focus on Jennifer Hart, signs of turmoil began to emerge. And let me now take you through the real story of the Harts. I'm going to walk you through the multiple times that all 6 of these beautiful, innocent children were failed by the adults entrusted by the system to care and protect them. And not just the Harts, but many adults. I'll save my outrage for a little bit later just for time. But let's rewind quite a bit back to the adoptions of these children. As I mentioned earlier, the first to be adopted were Markis, Hannah, and Abigail. So Sarah and Jennifer were living together in Minnesota. They had just dumped their 15-year-old foster daughter without warning, and they were ready for their next children. Markis, Hannah, and Abigail were siblings. They all had the same mother. I don't know that they had the same father. I think it was just the same mother. And she relinquished her rights to the child She relinquished her rights to the children to social services when Markis was 5, Hannah was 2, and Abigail was only 6 months old. And at that point, they were put into foster care. Now, Sarah and Jennifer went through the Permanent Family Resource Center, which was an adoption service agency in Minnesota, to adopt the 3 children in 2006. And I think a lot of these adoption agencies have come under a lot of criticism after this incident and other incidents. Jennifer and Sarah came off as a very wonderful couple. They had every intention of supporting these children in any way they could. They understood and agreed that it was very important to keep these children together as they were siblings. They did not want them to be separated, which is why they took all 3 of them. And at the time, it seemed like these kids really lucked out in being adopted by these 2 amazing women who were just so selfless and adventurous and loving, blah, blah, blah. By all appearances, they were a very happy family of 5. The kids were well-dressed, sociable. They were adorable. There was 2 very attractive, active, outgoing white women, yada, yada. Everyone loved them. In 2008, however, there was an allegation against the women about inappropriate physical violence in their home. Hannah, who was the middle one, she had told somebody at her school that her mother hit her with a belt. The child welfare investigated this claim, but the moms denied ever doing this, and there was no evidence to support their claim, so they moved on. And I think this is a huge pattern that you'll see in this case. And again, I'm going to try to save my rage. Also in 2008, the women went on to adopt 3 more children. Yes, amid the allegation of physical abuse. That didn't really seem to hinder the process at all, which is interesting. The next 3 siblings were Devonte, Jeremiah, and Sierra. Now, the mother of these 3 children was documented as having a long-time crack and cocaine addiction, and the state of Texas ordered that both parents give up their parental rights. Now, Priscilla Celestine was the biological aunt of Devonte, Jeremiah, and Sierra. She was their father's sister, and she stepped in and wanted to take care of these kids. She wanted them to stay out of foster care. Priscilla was a very good caretaker to these kids. She didn't have any drug problems or criminal history of any kind. She clearly loved them very much. She was a perfectly adequate legal guardian to these children. Now, it states very clearly in the CPS guidelines that blood relatives or somebody known to the children should be prioritized when it comes to choosing their foster guardians. Also, it says that you should prioritize keeping the children together if they're siblings. So this was literally the best case scenario. Priscilla was also caring for their fourth sibling, who we don't know their name. They've been kept out of the story, but this child apparently had either psychological or cognitive challenges. I'm not sure which one, but they were they had dysfunction and whatever. Now, one day Priscilla went into work. She was called into work last minute, and so she asked the biological mother to come and watch the kids while Priscilla went to work. It just so happened that on the day that this occurred, the child welfare workers showed up to check on them, and they found the mother alone with her kids. Now, this was a violation of the agreement. The mother was not supposed to be around the kids. Fair enough. But the social worker felt that this situation was so severe that she ordered that all of the children be removed from Priscilla's care and put into foster care. In everyone's account, Priscilla always comes off as like this angel. She was perfect and they were taken from her. And for all I know, that could be true. For all I know, it was a much less perfect situation. It was, and this is what I think Atlanta did very well, is like, and you have to watch it to understand what I'm saying, but I'm sure that the situation that these children were in was far less than ideal. But they were with their own family, okay? And this is, I think, where things get very murky, because I think it's like once you get CPS involved or once you get any of these agencies involved, like the standards for what the people, like the family, has to live up to become kind of unreasonably high. And it's just like, okay, they have to be removed. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, the children should be taken away from parents if there's like drug problems or whatever. But ripping them away from their family over something like this, I think a lot of people have issues with that. And I know all these childcare services, like, it's a very fine line, and it's like a lot of people criticize them for situations like this. I think there's a lot to criticize them about, and we'll get into it. Like, I think there's glaring issues with it. But then on the other side, it's like, okay, but like sometimes they're needed because parents are terrible. So it's I think it's a very interesting debate, but I even feel bad saying interesting because at the end of the day, at the end of that debate or argument, like, there's children's lives. So it's something that should be taken extremely seriously. And I don't know. I find it very upsetting. And it's not just children. It's like extremely vulnerable children who, just knowing the fact that they're in this system, you know that they've led lives of trauma, neglect, abuse, you name it. We'll get more into the details as we go along. But anyway, Priscilla was very upset. She did everything she could to try to get these children back, including hiring a lawyer to fight on her behalf, and she was denied at every turn. The fourth child was also removed, and he was placed, or I don't know if it was a boy or girl, but they were placed in a psychiatric facility. So like, this is, I'm sure that was not a nice place either. I can't imagine it was like a better place than living with his own aunt who loved him enough to take him in and care for him. Sorry, I don't know if it's a boy or girl. Anyway, in June of 2008, Devonte, Jeremiah, and Sierra were brought to Minnesota to live with Jen and Sarah. And they, like the others, had a 6-month trial period before they were legally adopted by the Harts. And then the Hart family of 8 was completed. I'm not saying that their motives for adopting all of these kids were financial, but just to be clear, under the adoption agreement, they received $400 to $500 per child per month, as well as social assistance for 2 of the boys. And this money made up a very large chunk of their income. Because remember, Sarah is working at Kohl's and Jennifer is staying home. So this is like a lot of their cash flow. We've got a family of 8, hunky-dory. I'm going to now go through the allegations of abuse that began in 2008. So we already had the 2008 allegation, but then in 2010, more allegations start rolling in. So in 2010, Abigail told one of her teachers that her mom put, quote, owies, end quote, on her tummy. Abigail lifted her shirt to show her teacher, and according to the teacher, there were visible bruises all over Abigail's stomach and back. CPS investigated this, and they found additional bruises all over Abigail's back and bottom area. Abigail said that her moms found a penny in her pocket, and they believed that she'd stolen it. And as punishment for stealing a penny, they held her head under cold water and hit her. That was her claim. Now, when the kids were interviewed, they all said that they'd been hit and they'd had food withheld from them. Abigail said that it was Jen who hit her, but Sarah was the one who pled guilty to domestic assault in April of 2011. And the claim was that she'd spanked the child too hard because she'd gotten too angry. And she said that she took Abigail into the bathroom and bent her over the tub and spanked her. She said that Abigail being bent over the tub was probably what accounted for the bruising on her stomach. Now, Sarah was sentenced to 1-year probation and community service. And they also dropped the charge of malicious punishment of a child. That's it. That's all she received. Between November, and again, everything else, like, as I said, the other children were interviewed and said that they'd been hit and had food withheld from them. But that was not enough for them to, go after Jennifer or take them away. It was terrible that their birth mother was with them for a few hours. And fair enough, she's a drug addict, like she's not supposed to be around them, okay. But the kids alleged that their parents are hitting them and not giving them food. And there's no yanking them out of their foster care. That seems kind of unfair to me. I don't know about you. Between November of 2010 and January of 2011, there were 6 allegations of abuse called into CPS. The kids said that their moms were not giving them food and that they were being physically abused. Again, the same allegations. There was never enough evidence to determine that the children were being abused. Every time CPS went over to the home, the house was full of fresh food that appeared to be out in the open, and Sarah and Jen denied everything and were very pleasant and convincing women. Now, I think, it's very difficult to believe, they just talked their way out of it, but remember, these kids all came from kind of dysfunctional homes or whatever, and Sarah and Jen really played this up and made the kids sound like they had all these behavioral issues and couldn't be trusted, et cetera, et cetera. And apparently Jennifer was very convincing. Conveniently, after all of these allegations, the children stopped ever being in situations where they were alone with adults. They were pulled out of school and homeschooled, and they didn't go to other kids' houses. They didn't have other friends. They only spent time with the mothers and themselves. So many glaring red flags, yet nothing is done. This should terrify everybody. On June 28th of 2013, another allegation came in, and this time it was from one of Jennifer's friends. And their allegation was that Jen was staying with them in Oregon. So Jen, as I mentioned before, she was always taking these kids to music festivals and all this shit in Oregon, whatever. So she was staying with friends in Oregon, and they had ordered some pizza for dinner. And the friend found it very weird that Jen only gave each child one very tiny piece of pizza. These are growing kids. Kids chow down on multiple pieces of pizza. And it wasn't that they didn't have enough pizza. She just said, you only have this one tiny piece of pizza. In the middle of the night, one of the kids, I believe it was Sierra, came down and ate some of the leftover pizza because obviously she was starving. In the morning, Jen discovered what Sierra had done. She woke up Sierra, dragged her out of bed by the arm, and then she had all 6 kids lie down on their backs on an air mattress with sleep masks over their faces and their arms by their sides, and they had to stay like that for 5 hours. When the friend confronted Jen about this, Jen apparently didn't see anything wrong with her behavior and was very defensive. I don't know, but I have to assume that Jen probably cut this friend off after for challenging her about her parenting. And so that friend went right to CPS and reported this. Now, she went to the Oregon CPS, which is not where they lived. They were still living in Minnesota. So that, I think, wasn't super helpful, but like it did get the Oregon CPS aware of what was going on in Minnesota. Now, over the next while, months and years, multiple friends of the Harts made reports. Most of them were variations on Jen and how she was very cold towards the kids, how she often ignored them. She would only show them affection or attention if she wanted to get photos of them. The children, they claimed, were like super robotic and kept quiet. The friends would say that they felt that most of the kids probably wouldn't say anything even if they were interviewed, but they felt that if they could get Markis alone, that he might be honest. And I don't know why that is, if it was just because he was the oldest or if like maybe he had said something to somebody. Other allegations came in about the children looking very malnourished. They were all very small kids. They were very thin, and they all looked to be much younger than their actual ages. Now, CPS did get involved amid these allegations. They interviewed the kids separately, but they conducted these interviews in the home while Jen and Sarah were around. And all the kids denied that they were being abused, which this to me is such, I think that's unequivocally a horrible way to go about an investigation. You need to be able to separate the kids entirely from the parents and really make them believe that they can say whatever they want and nothing bad will happen to them. And you need to not only say that, but like mean it and be there for them. Like you can't just interview kids in the home that they're alleging that they're being abused in. And when they say, no, everything's fine because their abuser is right there, then just be like, oh, okay, well, like this 12-year-old is telling the truth, obvious. Like that's insane. I won't go too much into it. Jen and Sarah were interviewed, but they, of course, denied everything as usual. And when questioned, Jen presented this narrative that all the kids came from very abusive houses or homes when they were younger. They were acting out, and she made them all seem like these like feral kids with food issues and behavioral issues. And so like she needed to like control the food. And because of the way that she controlled it, they thought that they weren't being given enough food. And like all of this stemmed from their abusive backgrounds. But she was the Mother Teresa of this family, and she knew what was best for everyone. She took educational things in university, so she knew what she was talking about, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. CPS then requested a secondary assessment by a private child welfare organization, but they were denied this secondary assessment based on the children's statements, which is so enraging because obviously the statements are not true. They did get medical examinations done with a doctor, and those evaluations determined that 5 out of the 6 kids were well below normal weight and height and were not tracking in terms of development. But the doctor did say that otherwise they were healthy. Now, I did watch this documentary on Discovery Investigation about this whole thing. Fuck, I forget what it's called, but I'll find it. And there's a journalist guy in the documentary, and he made a very good point that these kids were not all related. Like there was 2 groups of siblings, but they were not related to each other. Yet they all had the same stunted development problem. I'm not a doctor, not yet anyway, but it seems like this should have been a major red flag. This should have been a clue that whatever was stunting their growth was environmental. That and the fact that these allegations are all over food. Like, how is this not adding up? How are police not fucking SWAT teaming these ladies? I don't know. It's just, and then, so they do all this assessment. 6 months it took them to write up this report where it stated that they really felt that something suspicious was going on in the house, but they did not have sufficient evidence to do anything about it. Sorry. These are vulnerable children. These are children who came from lives that must have been traumatic. They were in foster care. Like, there's not a child in foster care who is not vulnerable in some way due to the reason that they're put in foster care. And you can't just throw up your hands and say that there's not enough evidence to do anything. It's not a court of law. Okay, I understand in a court of law, like to convict somebody of something, you need evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. That should not be the case when it comes to allegations of child abuse. We should have a much lower standard of evidence for something like that, especially when there's years of multiple allegations, when these women have a history of taking in foster children and just, see ya, we don't want you anymore. I am often, like, you know, when like discussing child protective services, my husband and I always talk about it because there's been a lot of cases, especially around where we live, where child protective services, or what we have is Children's Aid Society, is like sometimes they can get a little bit overly protective, where it's like, you know, there was a really famous story in Vancouver where this dad had 5 kids and they were divorced. So he was the single dad when he had them, and they were ages from like 8 to 12 or something. And he was teaching them how to ride the bus to school by themselves, which was like, he did the rounds with them 5 times, taught them how to do it. There's 5 of them. Some of them are babysitting age. And like one lady on the bus complained about seeing these 5 kids by themselves, and there was this investigation of him and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, so sometimes they go too far. So I understand that there's a very fine balance, and it's not so cut and it's not so easy to determine like this is okay and this is not. It's like, I don't take it lightly to make these criticisms. However, this is insane. And I think that we know, like, we know about this case because of how it ended. There's probably hundreds, thousands of kids right now who are in situations like this and not being heard because somebody who is abusing them is saying, oh, they have issues, they have mental issues, and I'm taking care of them. And they're not getting the help that they need. And that just kills me. I'm not going to cry, but this case, I just really, really bothers me. And this is where I'm going to end it for today. In part 2, we'll go through the rest of what happened and talk about a lot of the ways in which Jennifer portrayed her family online. And that is also extremely upsetting. So it'll be fun. If you are enjoying this, I really don't like saying enjoying, but if you are finding this interesting, please stick around, please subscribe, please like and comment and let me know what you think. I'm really interested to hear if anybody else saw the Atlanta episode. I was talking about it with Aidan the other day, and he also saw it and didn't realize that it was about something, it was about a real case. Yeah, hit me up and stay safe out there and look out for children, please, because you never know who's knocking. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.